Blockchain and distributed ledgers have changed the face of online financial transactions and have spawned an entirely new ecosystem of developers. The pace of these changes is unprecedented and its impact is uncertain. To discuss the future of developing the blockchain in conversation with Vice's Anne Gaviola, please welcome the founder and CEO of Alchemist, Steve Nerayoff.
Look at all these people and their bright, shiny faces, Steve. It is a wonderful time to be alive, and before we get into the meat of our discussion, because we have a lot of things to cover, a very quick intro about myself. My name is Anne Gaviola. I'm the Economics and Money Editor at Vice. I'm based in Toronto, Canada. I've been a business journalist for years. I took a little time out from my career in journalism this year. I spent 7 months at Canada's largest blockchain company, and I learned a ton. I'm a certified Bitcoin professional, and I am stoked to be here with Mr. Steven Nerayoff. We have so much to discuss. You are a serial entrepreneur. Let's start with the basics. What should be centralized? What has no business being centralized?
Sorry?
What should be centralized, and what has no business being centralized?
So, the decentralized theme, there's been a phrase that's been used for quite some time, let's decentralize everything, and certainly I'm very sympathetic to that. I think there's certain use cases that probably won't ever fully be decentralized, and so if you need something that has super high latency, or maybe it's a very closed system, I think maybe in today's world, maybe air traffic controlling or your manufacturing plant, and it's not a widely used system. Those things are probably better to not be decentralized, but the majority of other things, I think, are well to be decentralized. It's really more of a matter of when. So let's, you could use by example, let's say, one area that's been hot over the years has been like decentralized storage. So there's a number of companies, there's Filecoin, there's storage, there's Siacoin. They're all kind of looking at this and they're trying different methodologies to do it, and the decentralized makes a lot of sense. You're doing a sharing economy, you're lowering costs, you're doing a lot of things in terms of expanding that ecosystem, but it's going to take time. So there'll be decentralized, there'll be partially decentralized, centralized, partially decentralized, and then fully decentralized, but that's going to take a number of years.
Let's zoom out a little bit. Let's talk about the industry. I love asking this question. Where are we? Is cryptocurrency, is blockchain in its infancy? Is it a toddler? Is it a teenager? Where are we?
Can we use embryo? Because, look, I mean, when you think about it, if you look at the commercial internet that came around 1995 with Netscape, it was 30 years with governments around the world and universities and a ton of funding, and they were pretty much like in unison when the ARPANET was developed, and then everybody kind of agreed in the early 90s we're going to do TCP/IP. That's the protocol. There's not multiple protocols, and this was all one thing. And then it took another year, 10 years for Web 2.0 to come around with all the social media and everything. So that was like a 40-year process. And this is a bunch of young guys and gals doing it over here, and another bunch doing it over here, and nobody can agree on which protocol it is. And this is a much more complex situation that's moving much faster, that's expanding to address needs that are exponentially larger than the commercial internet was. So I think that it's, given that took 40 years and the speed that we're going, I think we're really early.
Okay, we're going to talk about something that you haven't talked about publicly yet, so this is the place. It's a little bit of a contrarian point of view, and I want you guys to remember where you were when you heard this. You are concerned about, yes, this technology has great disruptive potential, but we have to go into it with our eyes wide open, because this technology that's supposed to sort of liberate us, free us from the middlemen, allow people to take control of their personal information, their digital information, it could also be used by centralized powers to entrap us. Please explain that.
So, yeah, I haven't talked about this. I mean, if you look at it logically, I mean, if you're a let's say, an entity like a government, and you're looking at this, what we're doing in terms of decentral, and this is unusual because there's this technology revolution that had a philosophical underpinning. You know, some people call it libertarianism, whatever you want to call it, but it was about liberating, and it was about having freedom, and it was about being kind of outside the system or this new system, and it's really kind of ironic. But if you look at it logically, if you are the system, you could actually use this technology to do the exact opposite. So if you were a government, you could have actually a government blockchain. You could turn the euro or the dollar or whatever it is into a crypto that is permissioned just by the government. And now it's the exact opposite. You don't need to file your tax returns. They'll just tell you what you owe, and they know your address. They know every transaction you've done. They know who you've transacted with. I mean, it's the level of privacy has diminished greatly in that environment. There are a couple of examples right now that are fringe, to be sure, but the governments that are looking, and the one particular is the Marshall Islands, where they passed a law to actually have a fully decentralized currency that would not be in their control. So it's almost like a crypto gold standard, but they would be set with a certain inflation rate, and that's it. They get a certain amount of the tokens, and that's the rest of it. But that's really letting go of your own monetary policy. I'm not sure that most governments are willing to do that at this point.
Fascinating stuff. Now, I should say that I talked to Joseph Lubin, one of the co-founders of Ethereum, earlier today, and I told him about that, and he said, that's just FUD. That's sowing fear, uncertainty, and doubt. He's not quite sure he sees it in such a dystopian light. Maybe in certain countries, but not around the world.
Well, I certainly respect Joe's opinion, and I don't mean it to be that way. So it was a conversation we were having, and it wasn't really about. I'm not ultimately really concerned, because I think people will do what people will do, institutions will do what they'll do, and society will move forward. It's really just about what makes logical sense, and I think we do have these technologies, and if we do implement them and we move quicker and the industry works together more cohesively, then other systems can be built. And so the lesson by Bitcoin is, I can deal with you and I don't need anybody else.
So let's talk about this fast-moving industry. I had to be in it to actually experience that. I was in it for 7 months, but honestly, it felt like 7 years. Those are crypto years, right? So let's talk a little bit about trying to regulate this space, because everything changes minute by minute. Do you think that regulators in the US, for example, are equipped with the right kind of staff, the right kind of knowledge to be able to regulate? Because we want them to be able to create a framework so that the men and the women who are building businesses understand sort of the roadmap, like here's what you're allowed to do, here's what you're not allowed to do. But we also don't want the regulation to be too heavy-handed. We don't want it to quash innovation, right?
Right, so I don't envy regulators what they have to deal with here, given what's happening with not only just the utility token side, but now this emerging security tokens. They are just getting their hands around what these things mean, and effectively the laws that were created do not fit. Round peg, square hole, very simple, and they don't have the means to regulate this area, and it's moving so rapidly that whenever they say, all right, we think we've got it, the innovation has already changed and they're over here. So if they were to come down heavy, no, they're not equipped to handle it. I mean, they would be, there's been talk about, they're going to deem everything to be a security. I mean, that's just not realistic. I mean, it's thousands of projects, millions of people have contributed to this. How you don't put that toothpaste back in the tube. But I think there's reasonable regulation if industry can work with them.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about disruption too. You don't see crypto, blockchain being a complete disruptor, and that the JP Morgans and the big stalwarts of Wall Street are still going to be around, right?
Well, I think there's going to be several categories. I think there's going to be a new type of financial institution, and it may be a community. It may be a decentralized network. So, but the word institution is also going to be changing in our head, and that's probably going to be, the standard bearer. The financial institutions that exist today, one or two things are going to happen. They're either going to adapt to this, or they're just going to fade away. And the ones that adapt, they actually could get even larger, not necessarily more powerful, just because the entire system is going to get bigger. But there's these decentralized networks. They can participate in them, and they can actually increase their market share. And they can grow. Their influence may actually be lower, but that's okay. I mean, they're looking at bottom line.
And I think it's been described as sort of there's a bigger financial pie, so there are bigger pieces for everyone. Is that kind of how you see that playing out?
Right. When you look at the words quadrillion starts getting thrown around in terms of tokenizing assets as one example, that pie is going to become very large. And it's right now like about 20% of the world economy. It could become even larger than that, at least for a good while. So yeah, there's a huge opportunity for the ones that adapt, and you're seeing them, taking to blockchain technology in a big way for their own plumbing, for their own purposes. So they're getting knowledgeable, and I think a lot of them will see the opportunity here and not resist it.
So I have to ask you this because I've been asked to ask you on social media, where do you see the price of Ether going? What's your time frame? So let's start with, where do you see it for the rest of this year and then for next year?
So I think the more important question there is, what do you see in terms of the underlying fundamentals, right? So it's they're right now the largest network. It's the protocol of choice, and they have huge network effects. And so I think a lot of people forgot, at least in Ethereum's case, is that Ether has a fundamental purpose. So there's smart contracts, there's dApps, there's transactions, and most of this hasn't happened. With 15 transactions a second or whatever it is, I mean, it's just a little bit of value transfer right now. But there's thousands of these dApps being built, and once those start coming online, there's this huge demand that's going to come in, and in their case, this fuel is that's what it's going to fuel these decentralized applications. And so there's this. I think it would just suffice it to say there is no ceiling for the 1, 2, or 3 top broad winners. There'll be a lot of specialized protocols, in my opinion, but for the kind of the broad plays, those 3 really probably wouldn't have any ceiling on them.
And a price?
Over time, you put me on. If it went 100x from here, I wouldn't be surprised. But it's not because I'm looking at it as an investment per se. I just think that the fundamentals are just going to cause it to grow because it's just a natural. It's got its supply, and it's going to be exponentially bigger.
All right. So it's been a pretty wild year in terms of crypto prices. We've seen peak crypto. We've seen the bear market. Tell me how that impacts the ability to create decentralized technology, the impact on the projects.
Well, I think it shouldn't really, because you're seeing a ginormous bear market right now, but what you're also seeing is projects getting funded to a level that you've never seen before. And being oversubscribed 10, 20, 30x. So
the community is getting bigger.
Absolutely, it's getting bigger. There's a lot of have and have nots. So it's much more discriminate in terms of what is getting funded, the use cases. People, I think, have gotten a little sober in terms of just throwing money at everything. It's not about that anymore. They're really looking to see what has got a large market potential. Can this team execute? Kind of some old line VC questions, but they're just a little more educated in terms of the market opportunity.
I got to ask, where are we at in terms of Ethereum solving its scalability, interoperability problems?
So, nobody solved that, right? So it's not their problem per se. Anybody else who said they've solved it, it's theoretical at this point. Nobody's commercially viable, and so certainly nobody's enterprise ready. The new Casper's coming out, and there's a ton of potential there. So all the questions about scalability and all this, it reminds me of, for anybody who was around during the internet boom, and I was in Silicon Valley at the time, it was all about we're not going to have broadband. People actually didn't believe that we're going to have broadband, the dial-up modems, right? And that was the big argument for a long while, that why the internet will never take off. I mean, it sounds ridiculous now when we're on our phones, and it's almost instantaneous, right? So I think that there's more smart people entering this space than probably any space in the world right now. And I am not concerned about technical issues being resolved over time.
With all those smart people in this space, innovating, thinking of the next great thing, where are all the killer apps? I thought this year was going to be the one where we'd see, one after the other. Do we just have to wait till next year?
Well, if you look at history, one thing we're horrible at doing as a species is determining what the killer app is going to be, or whether or not there even will be one, right? If you look back at the computer revolution, people looked at this thing and they didn't even understand that there would be an app, right? And then all of a sudden, these guys developed something called VisiCalc, was the original spreadsheet, and that spawned what, like the private equity industry wouldn't even exist without that, right? So it's, the consequences long term can be exponential from this one, initial killer app. Initially, the killer app for us was, ironically, was the ICO, right? So that's what kind of exploded, and people got to use, in Ethereum's case, Ether, because they were buying it in, because that was the protocol of choice per se. But I don't know where it's going to come from. I just know that it probably, if we ask, the very few people would ever even guess it would be by luck. But when it comes, it's going to be huge. It's going to be unexpected, and then it's going to kick off. And then all of a sudden, people's imaginations won't be so foggy. They can actually start seeing something real implemented and actually use it.
I'm going to switch to some questions from the audience, from people joining us. So someone is asking, is there too much hype around this space? Is it overhyped?
Okay, so hype is not the right word. I mean, are you saying that there's too much promise? I mean, what you're seeing is a technology that has is permeating every single industry. Right, I'm walking around at Web Summit and I'm hearing talk after talk after talk that have nothing to do with blockchain, incorporating blockchain and how they're going to have their blockchain strategy. Yeah, maybe they don't really know what that means, but the reality is it's going to seep into everything. And if you look at things like, let's say, Linux, where everybody thought it was going to be consumer facing, and it actually turns out it wasn't, but it actually was as big as people thought it would be. It just kind of went behind the scenes. I think it's the same thing with blockchain, but you've got multiple revolutions. I don't know how it is. You've got this financial revolution going on. You've got a technical revolution going on. You've got this plumbing revolution going on. Like, it's so confusing, but really there's multiple explosions happening.
It's an exciting time to be alive, for sure. Okay, so my next question is, does AI, robotics, and blockchain plus crypto equal mass unemployment, universal basic income?
Is it AI and blockchain?
Yeah, are AI and blockchain going to take people's jobs?
AI always takes people's jobs. It's not blockchain. So, I mean, that's independent of blockchain. But it also it's been shown that AI can also, the jobs that it's taking end up producing more high-paying jobs. So it's at the lower end of the spectrum that ends up getting taken by AI.
Okay, another one is, will Bitcoin be the king?
It has every opportunity, right? So it's, but it's the king of what, right? Will it be the protocol of choice to do dApps on it? Maybe. I mean, they haven't done any right now, and there's one project coming out that's going to allow it to do that, but that's totally unproven. Right now, it's been value transfer. Some people say store value. I think it's more speculative than store value at this point in its life cycle. So is it the king of value? Probably. Value transfer? Probably. But is it, the king of anything else? That's all to be determined.
That brings me to a question of mine. One thing that I noticed in the space, in this industry, it's very tribalistic. I mean, if you're team Bitcoin, you're not necessarily team Ethereum, and people are passionate about it. Is it to the industry's detriment?
Well, no, actually I don't think it is, because, and that has to do with the fact that we as a species are just not very evolved, right? So if you look at, there are examples of this has been done really well, and I think if you look at Apple and what Steve Jobs did there, many years ago, he created a team to do the Apple, and then he had another team doing Lisa, and he pitted them against each other under the same, corporation, paying the same salaries to the people, but they were violently fighting with one another, but they were both trying to get to the same goal. And they got to a better goal. So while I'd like to think we could all just, sit around in a group and, meditate with each other, and it's just not the way we work as a species. So there is a tribalism going on in blockchain, but I think it actually is producing better results.
Fantastic. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. If you guys have enjoyed the conversation, you can find us on social media. My Twitter handle is @AnnGaviola. Stephen Nerayoff. Let's take a quick selfie. For posterity. Thank you.